80 students. So we have another great interview ahead of us here. So we've got Jonathan Hodges. And so Jonathan and I know each other also from our work together at Ascend Learning as we worked both on the product side and Jonathan on building up a really advanced data analytics technical structure. We worked together to bring to life, a pretty big roadmap of things. And Jonathan has a deep history in data analytics going back many, many, many years. And so we're fortunate to have him from the kind of the view of somebody in an executive suite who's had a lot of experiences with data analytics, both on the technical side, leadership side, et cetera, et cetera. So with that said, welcome, Jonathan. Excited to have you.
All right. Well, appreciate you guys inviting me.
Absolutely. So if you don't mind, just to kind of kick it off, maybe just give us a little bit of background on your current role and what you're working on today.
Yeah, so I'm currently leading up AI and enterprise analytics for a healthcare company called Global Health Exchange. So what that means is I'm trying to help them. They basically sit between, all these medical device suppliers like Johnson & Johnson's, Medtronic, Strykers of the world. And they need to be able to sell into hospitals, medical facilities. And so we're basically our biggest app, or it's called the Exchange, basically sits in between about 70% of that US-based medical device traffic. And so my team, among other things, we take data, that's going across that exchange and trying to build products that we can help out those suppliers or those providers in terms of making sure they can do business. And, I didn't think about this as much until I took this role, but, in really extreme cases, this could mean life or death. Procedures can't happen if the devices aren't at the right place at the right time. I think throughout the interview, I could expand on some of that and where I felt that there were some really great use cases. Obviously with the pandemic, there's some pretty interesting things we were able to, I think, help out with that. And so it's been a pretty exciting role.
Awesome. Yeah, and healthcare being a really critical thing. And one of our other interviews, we talked a little bit about healthcare as well. So I'd love to kind of hear some more thoughts around that, given how important it is, to everybody's life. Just to kind of keep going down the rabbit hole a little bit, maybe you would talk to us about, kind of your education and, your programs that you've been involved, whether they had to do with data analytics or not, and, some of the other workplace experiences that you've had.
Yeah. So it's been pretty interesting. I think from the education side, I started out my undergrad in management information systems at Auburn University way back when. And, I didn't, at that point in time, I was not thinking of data and analytics. I wasn't focused in that career. It wasn't until I got into the workforce. And my first job was at Priceline.com. And not even then, it took a little while. I was an individual contributor, back-end developer, working with data, working with databases, working with code, but just more general use cases. I spent, probably about 10, 12 years, working in that type of role. And it took me into working at NBC Universal. But before I finish that, I'll finish my education. It's kind of interesting. I'm actually, believe it or not, 47 years old and I'm in school. I'm going back. I'm getting my master's at UC Berkeley, focused in information and data science. And I'll expand on some of that later. But I think where it kind of the aha moment came within my career. I was at NBC Universal. This time I was living in New York City. And we got asked to partner on a project. They were still owned by GE. GE researchers were going to work with us. They weren't called data scientists yet, but today they would very much be called data scientists, stats background. There's not as, back then there wasn't as prevalent like all these data science programs, or different very specialized things in university or all the things you can find online. So this is mainly folks who just had that background, had that skill set, could build models, just weren't necessarily called the sexiest job in the world yet. But what our project was how do we raise advertising revenue on the various NBC properties, NBC.com, Sci-Fi, Bravo, CNBC. And when you look at the different kinds of traffic coming to the sites, they were watching videos mostly. Can I see the TV show from the night before, or whatever type of content was there? I think it was probably around the same time Netflix and Amazon had gotten some fanfare for their recommendation algorithms. And so what we did is we took a lot of that behavior, what are these folks doing on our site? Social networks were now part of the discussion. So, who are these friends, of these users, and maybe what were their friends watching? And so today this would be a drop dead stupid algorithm, but what we did is we just took those preferences, folks had rated videos, so we kind of understood like what content they liked and what their friends liked, and just took the friends list and aggregated them up, and just said rank, brute force, rank order, here's the ones at the top. And we just started, launched a recommendation service to start, putting it on the website so these users would see that. We'd also have just a general trending video service. And then with the search results, we also boosted those search results to be very biased based on who that user was. And again, this is like 101 web personalization today, but back then we got a massive lift, almost I think it was close to 20%, which over all those properties was several $1,000,000. And that was the aha moment. I'm like, wow, I see the power of data. I see the power of algorithm development and what you can do with that. And that point in time, I decided, hey, I'm no longer going to do anything else but focus in data and analytics. And so from that point on, I took numerous other roles over the next, I guess, 10 or 12 years, working at Pearson, got into the ed tech space. Also, when we crossed paths at Ascend Learning, also had stops at Workiva before I got to GHX. And this meant, not just being an individual contributor, but moving up in the ranks, being manager, and now leading small to large 100+ organizations of data scientists, data engineers, ML engineers, data scientists, analysts, and trying to figure out how do we make value for whatever company that I'm working for? How can we help our customers with these approaches? And, I can still remember the CTO who was my boss at NBC's face when I went in there, because I was leading up the video team. I had not my favorite TV shows, but America's Got Talent, The Voice. I actually, my team built the voting systems for that. So it was awesome, great applications, but, I didn't want to do that anymore. I wanted to really focus in data analytics. And, maybe it took a couple conversations, to talk him into this, but eventually he said, you know what, we're going to let you do that. We're going to let you open up a small office in Denver in a GE facility. And I had a very small Hadoop cluster at that point in time. And I think we had some Pentaho reporting, had a reporting team, and the rest is history. That's all I've done since. And, I've been pretty happy with, my career so far.
That's great. So kind of building upon that, you've worked in media, you've worked in ed tech, now you're working in healthcare, and obviously with Ascend, you worked on more than just that. Where do you kind of see the symmetry and similarity between those industries, and then where do you see the differences?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is just beyond getting into the actual domains, but if you think about from a data and analytics practitioner, it's about the data. So that's where I see the differences. Is you've obviously seen a lot of these verticals have maybe been further down that digital transformation, process. Some of them are native, like the ones who probably made the most headway have been like these FANG companies who came B2C and just have endless amounts of user behavioral data to mine and have really driven AI. Then you take, healthcare or, some of these other, or even going really further into things like manufacturing, these other more, say, brick and mortar type professions, they're maybe a little bit behind. They're kind of the longer tail. I see how they're eventually all going to get there. It's just going to take time. Some of these folks need to, how do I even have data yet? Like I don't have maybe data on all my processes in manufacturing. Healthcare, while they have data, has been fairly ugly, nasty data, not the right quality, or even though they have all these standards, they seem to have, had a lot of trouble getting these, different types of facilities to be on the same page. How do they communicate? Or you got some who are still in EDI or super old processes. So there's a lot of just maturity or digital transformation prerequisites are required to really harness and take advantage of data analytics, AI and that power. And I think that's more than anything kind of where you see the differences and why some are, not moving as fast as others. But I think, you look at those things like healthcare. I mean, there's not a area, or I mean, education and healthcare are some of the biggest areas that should be disrupted in this country. And I think AI will have a place to say or help in that endeavor. So it's going to be interesting. And just from my interest perspective, I'm currently at a healthcare company. I want to continue it. I think a lot of the advancements, while I'm more focused on supply chain optimization, I want to get more involved in helping patient care. How do we get, good outcomes for our patients? How do we raise the level of our healthcare? How do we make it more affordable? With how advanced this country is, I feel like we've not done a great job for our patients, in terms of all the money we throw into healthcare, probably not getting the level of outcomes we think from those investments. So I think there's a big place to play there. And I see myself continuing in the healthcare domain, for quite a while.
That's great. And, there's a interesting piece I want to kind of pick up on a little bit later around AI and get some of your thoughts there, especially around ethics and things like that. But if you would, you mentioned that you've gone back to school, and obviously you've got tons of experiences in the real world, over decades here with data analytics programs. Is that has become a bigger and bigger thing. Why go back?
Yeah, what I'll say, and this probably applies to many other fields, but I know since I'm in this field, data analytics is not a stationary topic. It's always evolving. While maybe on the data engineering side, you're starting to see more standardization. Everybody's kind of settled on a data lake, maybe a data warehouse. Maybe different flavors, but generally that's starting to settle down. On the AI space or the ML ops, space, that place is just wild. Tons of new startups every day, new entrants, folks taking their maybe stuff they did at these big FANG companies and building companies out of it. So from my perspective, it's been hard to keep up. But what I'll say is you got to be a lifetime learner. You're learning stuff every day. I've joined different news groups. I'm reading articles on Medium. But specifically to UC Berkeley, I was an individual contributor more in a back-end engineering. I actually was a data engineer for many years. They didn't have this title, but I was technically an ML engineer as well, because Hadoop would just sort of hold all those things, both ETLs, data movement, but also training models. So I was doing those things hands-on before I became a manager. And so I enjoy hanging out with our architects, our engineers, having design sessions, whiteboard. I can still go in there and, feel like I'm contributing. I don't feel that way on the data science side. From the algorithm perspective, like they're quite different, than, the engineering pieces that I came up in. And I felt like, if I'm going to be leading these teams, I should better understand what they go through day to day. How can I organizationally, I might not be writing probably too many production models. That's really not the point. It's what are these guys doing, guys and gals doing day in, day out? How can I organizationally help them scale these programs? How do I remove the barriers? How do I have fun sitting in those design sessions, at some point and, helping them, spitball new models or approaches, and just something I felt was going to be necessary. And just frankly, I got this feedback actually directly. One of my goals in my career is I want to be a chief analytics officer at some point, ideally be in a healthcare space. But what I was finding is, I was getting shortlisted, or, basically any kind of interview process just wouldn't make it to the final rounds. And the feedback was, we're really looking for somebody who has had that data science experience, that understands the power of AI, machine learning, and data engineering. Even though I have all that experience, just wasn't as big of a deal. And maybe that is because you're seeing more settled architectures in the space. It's not as hard to land on that. We're still very widely open in AI. And I can't remember the exact statistic, but I think it's like something like 85% of AI projects fail. And so I think that's where, just as an industry, they need some people who've been there, done that, not just hand wavy, but hey, I've been successful doing these things. And I felt like UC Berkeley was going to help me, get that experience and then apply it in my day to day so that I could kind of plug that gap and hopefully still continue on my goal to be a chief analytics officer one day.
I love the thinking about how you pair professional and academic and how they kind of partner together in people's careers. Because one of the things that I've really found is the more successful people don't really look at academia and professional careers as like a sequence. They actually view them as kind of a parallel thing where they're doing both at the same time, and making those kind of continued investments. One of the things we talk a lot about within our group is these on ramps and off ramps, over a lifetime, with how you target or find opportunities to enhance just sort of that academic component, and how that can, blend over into what you're working on professionally or set you up for additional goals like, chief academic officer. So, one of the things for students I think is really important to understand is, that undergraduate degree, it's great. You're going to invest time there. Might be a little challenging to work at the same time. Probably many students do. I know I did. But really, they should really see this as an intertwined sort of experience that'll happen, with their careers, throughout a lifetime if they want to kind of be successful and have stability and get where they're trying to go. So I think it's great. When you think about your coursework so far, which I know maybe like halfway through the program at this point, what's been your favorite, course at UC Berkeley?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm a little older than a lot of the folks in the class. Maybe, maybe it's been like 30 years since I've actually looked at some of the calculus and prerequisites for the stats class. Seems like most people are like, man, that's brutal. Why would you want to do that? But I've actually enjoyed it. It's stuff that I haven't done in a long time, and I've enjoyed going back to that. And even though it's theoretical, it's just fascinating how somebody at one point figured out I can apply these, X and Y or Z or, all these, math concepts to something like machine learning. It started with statistics. They've obviously taken it further, and obviously it's gone much further since then, but it's just fascinating, how you can apply sort of uncertainty and things to kind of certain models and distributions. And so it's just, I guess maybe it's the nerd to me is coming out, but I've really enjoyed it. And the diversity of the people that are in the program has been really amazing. I had a ER surgeon from Germany, attending very late, a lady from Zimbabwe, in a chemical plant. So just very diverse backgrounds and points of view, which I think has just been amazing. So I just kind of enjoyed the people more than anything. Class-wise, I mean, I am about halfway through the program. I have enjoyed, even though I said I'm not going to be throwing models into production, I have enjoyed seeing how deep learning works, these big, huge neural nets. And I guess I'm lucky enough, UC Berkeley, that they have a lot of inroads to some of those FANG companies that I was talking about, who've been leading the charge and doing joint research projects together. Maybe Meta is not the best name for a lot of folks right now for a lot of things they've done on the privacy side, but they actually, a lot of people may not know, but they invest on things that have on AI projects that have nothing to do with Meta, or so they've done a lot of things like helping medical areas. Like their chief head of AI has been taking on a lot of neuroscience-based approach to AI and just generally trying to push the field further. I mean, obviously Meta could take advantage of those things down the line, but they do a lot of research on the medical side, trying to help out with patient outcomes. And before I got into, understanding, I would have never thought Facebook was involved with healthcare, but they actually are doing some things there that are leading to things like predict, like when doctors look at different charts, AI can see things that humans cannot. And so raising the accuracy levels of things like early detections of disease. And there's been a lot of work coming out of Meta and some of these bigger organizations that have, frankly, the infrastructure and the talent to go after use cases that a lot of other folks can't yet. So I think all those things together, it shows a great coalescence, as you said earlier, of education and, business and companies working together, on these missions. And I think, that's going to continue. I don't see how that's ever going to end in the end of the day.
Oh, that's great. One thing that I think might be a unique topic here, given how many people you've kind of led and managed over your career. Could you maybe talk a little bit about what it is to lead and manage, people in this space? Because it is kind of a unique space.
It is, like if you go back to my earlier days of just sort of, I guess what you want to call typical engineering or software development, I at least, maybe I'm biased, but you saw less diversity, I see more diversity on the analytics side. Like when you take a path, I mean, even just a data scientist itself, one person isn't going to have to handle all those very diverse domains, natural language processing, or maybe forecasting or time series. It's very diverse. And I think analytics team takes it even further. You have data science is a broad topic. It's not just modeling, it's telling a story with data. It's leveraging data for different types of purposes. It could be, I want to make sure my marketing department's doing the best they can, or, I want to be able to build descriptive analytics like business intelligence and charting and things to be able to describe complex, data, relationships, but, being able to show them graphically to get people on the same page. And I think it's this analytics teams more than any, it seems like they're kind of the sum of the parts. People have various different levels of skills that sort of go across that. It's almost like a matrix of you putting these diverse folks together to work on these data projects. Some of them are modeling, maybe some of them are data engineers who know how to store the data in the right place and make sure your database is always up so data scientists can do their work. Maybe data scientists made these awesome models, but they can't communicate those results to the senior leaders to make them actionable. So they're useless unless you can maybe bridge that gap with nicer charts to aggregate and show complex topics and be able to describe that to folks that this isn't their day job. And so it's just been fascinating to kind of put those pieces together and build those teams of these individuals to go after that mission. Yeah.
Let me build on that for a minute. You bring up a really good point, which is, clearly there's more people getting involved with a technical skill set in this space. So, I remember reading about 5 years ago that the real challenge for data analytics consumption in the future wouldn't necessarily be a lack of availability of people to be able to actually do the work to build these kind of insights. Actually the bigger challenge was how you got the rest of the workforce to embrace data analytics and to be able to correctly understand the information that was coming at them. How do you think about that as you think about either the C-suite or just, your kind of middle manager type or even frontline type who really doesn't have a data analytics background? How do you work through, creating this, confidence and consumption to use information, from some of the programs that you've built?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. And it's going to depend on where your organization is at a maturity level. Like you got to kind of, figure out where you are to put your strategy around. Like, I mean, even to begin with, these resources aren't cheap. The infrastructure behind it's not cheap. You're going to have to justify, those expenses. People aren't going to just want to have data science for having data science. It needs to drive meaningful value for the company. And so let's just take a case where maybe you're starting, maybe not completely from scratch, but early on. So in that case, you're going to have a good amount of evangelization you're going to need to do. You're going to need to get your senior leaders. The folks are, proving your budgets or allowing you to go hire this type of talent. They've got to see some value. I mean, luckily, it's not just, almost everybody knows there is a way to apply data and analytics. I mean, it doesn't, you need to think about it, hard about what are the first ways you do it, because you don't want to, if you're starting like in this early example, and I don't have a lot of experience or maturity, I don't want to bite off this massively complex project. You're going to have to figure out, how do I show value without making a huge bet or risk? And so this means finding that low hanging fruit that that you're going to be, high confidence that you're going to be able to deliver something. Because that's what some people forget sometimes. You think, oh, I've got data. I've got a data scientist. I'm going to make a model and it's going to be great. Well, maybe your data doesn't actually clean enough or show enough of the relationships to get you a model that's accurate enough to generalize for a use case. That happens more often than actually a successful one. And so it's typically a very iterative process where you may get to a certain point with the data you have and your models gets to, I'll just use accuracy as the metric, but maybe it's only 70% accurate. It's not going to be useful unless it gets to 90 plus. So that may mean a very iterative approach where what other data could I go get that can maybe raise this level? What's other data sets that I could find online, government, presets, something within my organization that I need to go instrument? So it's kind of a going back and forth process. So that's why I think it's important to go, and a lot of times I use this as a means of which project I'm going to do. What data do I have line of sight to? What do I feel confident in terms of the quality of that data for X use case? And I build a roadmap around delivering those things early. And once you do that, you can go to those senior leaders and go, hey, I said I was going to do this. Look what we did. They're going to trust you a little more if you're able to deliver on the thing you started with. You can start moving up the value chain. Say, hey, why don't we apply this now to this bigger bet over here that'll really move the needle? But it's going to take a little bit more trust and some funding, frankly. But if you're standing on some wins, it's much easier to get them, convinced that you can continue to scale this organization. And I think sometimes I think people want to do that flashy thing out of the gate. It fails, and then your program's over, or the boss doesn't want to hear, this huge amount you're putting in the next year's budget after you just fell on your face that first one. So I think it's being conservative. It's making sure you truly understand that these are not foregone conclusions. And make sure your boss knows that there's risk in all of these things. But this is how you're mitigating that risk. This is how you feel like you're going to be able to deliver value, and you put that together as part of your strategy.
Great. So what's hard about a career in data analytics?
Yeah, I've maybe touched on this a little bit by the fact that, it's not a stationary topic. You better be ready to put in the work to stay current. That's why I'm 47 years old in the master's program. You've got to commit to that, which is tougher. Got a family, got a day job. This isn't all just going to happen between 8 and 5. You're going to need to do a little bit more than that. Um, Lucky for me, I enjoy it. I'm passionate about it, and that's why I'm just intrigued. And so it's not a big, push for me to want to continue to learn and put in that time. But I think that makes it difficult for some, that part. Like a lot of folks would be like, hey, I already went to school, or I already had this job for 10 years. Why am I having to learn the next thing? But if you don't, you can find yourself maybe getting left behind and not able to work on the things that you were so happy with in the first place. So I think that part's hard. The other part that I also just touched on, hey, you did everything right. You got data. You got a data scientist. The data didn't work, and my model didn't work, and I didn't deliver value. Actually, maybe in some cases could be considered wasting value because I didn't get that end result that I was after. And that can be frustrating if you're not. Fail fast really means you want to learn how to fail fast without a lot of cost. Analytics is definitely one. Experimentation is just part of the thing. It's almost part of almost being considered R&D when you talk about model development. You don't know. Until you get in there and kind of look at that first model you put together, oh, this may not even be possible if it comes back, pretty poorly there. So having that fortitude to kind of continue to iterate, try new things, be creative to get to the other side. I think part of that's why I enjoy it, but it can also be hard, if you don't have a scripted path. Each project's going to be different, how you're going to employ these, which, again, there's pros and cons to that type of approach, but I could see that be why people could consider something like this hard.
What data analytics project in your career are you most proud of?
Yeah, gosh, there's been a bunch of them. I will say I was obviously proud, of a lot of the education work because I know what that does for, those lives, how it can improve their, almost everything, improve their, ability to go make more income, to support their families, to have better quality of life. I think healthcare is also similar in that domain. And so I guess these are maybe more fresh top of mind, but I've been really enjoying digital twins. And just to define what that means, a digital twin, I think actually it's a maybe newer term that's getting fanfare, but it comes from very old. I think if I want to say, you guys might need to check me on this, but I think I've heard that NASA, when they were building the space program, trying to get to the moon, they would have a lot of simulations about how these things would work in space or in the moon with zero gravity. And I think I've heard that that's where the term came from. So obviously not a new term, but I think where it's new is you're seeing it be deployed against these AI machine learning use cases. In my case, it's in healthcare around the supply chain. So this is things like, so we've modeled out, and it's not the logistics supply chain, like things like, hey, a truck's taking it here, or it's, on an airplane, those types of, very, very critical as well. But within my current organization, we really only have purview on more of the digital side. So when orders from these suppliers, and invoicing and payments and streamlining all of those things to make sure that, your catheter or your knee or whatever gets to be shown up at those procedures at the right time. I think even probably more top of mind was during the pandemic. Could the PPE get all out there? Can the COVID tests reach wherever they need to? And so these digital twins became very important. And this meant that we are simulating, meaning we didn't have data on how these things may fail. So that's what's really cool, because again, machine learning needs data and needs examples of things so that it can predict those types of things in the future, in more general cases. But a lot of these failure scenarios don't happen very often, or maybe they don't, and so you don't have a lot of data on that. And so your model is not going to be very good at predicting that, unless you try to synthesize or simulate those types of failures, then use data out of those simulations, which they call synthetic data, to train just like you were before. So it's kind of taking it a step up. It's a little bit more mature technique, but allows you to go after these use cases. Like the classic example is jet engines and them failing. They don't fail very often, but if they do, it's a pretty important thing. And so that was another area where I think GE did a lot of these simulations and digital twins. I think Amazon now has a digital twin of anybody who buys goods off of Amazon. And so this allows them to simulate buying behavior. Like maybe they change price or change how fast a good can get to you without actually impacting customers. They can do these sort of in the lab. And just like them, we're doing that on the digital supply chain to make sure that those devices can seamlessly get to their destinations? If there's recalls, back orders, other types of disruptions, how do they, survive that? And just a certain example might be, I was talking about catheters or, medical device things like, ACL knees, whatever it is. They have many different products in that space. So hospitals may be contracted with multiple of these types of vendors. And so maybe one of the ways is we can say, oh, we see there's a recall in some of your orders, but guess what? There's 3 different options that you could go select. Here, tell your clinical team to evaluate this and click a few buttons. All of a sudden, you've got that same failure just automatically adjusted. You've got maybe another version of that type of device going to get there, so you don't have to call up, all the folks that are coming in for surgery and having them reschedule. You can actually just seamlessly continue to do business. It doesn't seem like it's that, that critical, but if you start backing up these procedures, which we saw, there was a lot, like because the beds are being taken up during the pandemic, folks weren't able to come get procedures done. This could be, similarly, if devices aren't going to be showing up in places, folks are having to put off things that could potentially be, life or death type scenarios. And so the more you can unclog that pipe, the more the good things and the right things are happening across that ecosystem. And so I'd consider that some of my more favorite application at the time, because it kind of combines more advanced techniques, but then also has some really great outcomes, for folks on the healthcare side.
Do you think it's important for people who are working in data science and with data that they care about the domain of that data?
I would say yes for me, but I guess there could be a case where folks didn't care. They could potentially be still successful, but I feel like usually when you like something and you care about it, you tend to put forth a little bit more effort in my experience. So I think it doesn't hurt to have that so that you can apply more of that rigor behind what you're trying to deliver. So from healthcare perspective, that's why I am passionate about that. I have followed fields that I am passionate. I think I made that choice after I got out of media, and I've made that. So I said, hey, that was cool. I did those algorithms, but what was the impact of that? Some rich guy up here got a little bit more cheese for his bottom line. But then when you're talking about education and talking about healthcare, that's where it felt, my work has more impact and in the things that I cared about. And so I was more passionate about those things. So dear in my heart is education and healthcare. And I don't see me swaying too far from those areas. And it's helped me bring my best, but I guess it's possible others could be successful, but I would recommend wanting to enjoy your field if you're going to spend that much time in it.
Sure. Let's tilt to maybe a couple slightly controversial topics. Let's talk a little bit about artificial intelligence. What do you think, where do you think this is going, say the next 5-10 years, and what concerns you?
Well, yeah, I guess what's that saying? With great power comes great responsibility. AI is no different. We've rattled off a lot of good it can do. Unfortunately, if you got the wrong people employing it, they could be pointing it in things that could be not so great. I'm not trying to throw Meta under the bus, but they didn't do a lot of people a lot of good who folks who are trying to use data for good because of the Cambridge Analytica scandals and things like that, where it was used nefariously. It's made it harder for folks just trying to do good to have people's trust. They're very, and they should be, hey, where's my data going to be used? And I'm glad regulations are catching up, but technology is moving too fast. They're ahead of these regulations. And so it's putting that onus in the practitioner's hands, which again could be scary. If those people aren't good. What comes to mind to me is things like China, North Korea, some of these state actors who are getting very advanced with AI. And where that's going to go, that makes me a little nervous, Well, I say within my teams and my group, we take that very seriously. We want to make sure and let's take the customer first. If we're using data, some of the questions you start asking, like, with these folks, am I doing something for them? Is the value coming back to them? This is where you wouldn't want to be taking data here, selling to some third party or doing something over here that these people aren't aware of. There's a ton of that happening. And so we don't want to be seeing those types of things, or this stuff's going to be over before it starts. If we don't have the trust, I think everything goes south pretty quickly. If people don't trust that, this car is going to be able to drive and get us from point A to point B safely, or hey, when I'm doing these medical procedures, am I going to agree with this thing that just said I might have a chance of cancer, or something like this? It's going to be ubiquitous, I think, where these are going to be and it already is in a lot of cases. We don't even know that these things are going on. And you've got the things like, some regulations with loans, that obviously should be there, with the biases that could be used there. And you don't want to be proliferating discrimination or other things like that. And so you certainly need to insert ourselves there. So there is caution, but I've also pivoted to some of the great advancements I think are going to come out of these things, that, well, again, it's going to be how we deliver, but I don't think it's more about, everybody's worried, oh, it's going to steal my job or take this or that. Take more of the approach, just make people quality of life better. It might mean it needs to move some jobs to others, but not taking away jobs in general. Maybe there's some jobs that people don't enjoy, like I don't know what those are, like some very dangerous jobs or things you don't want to get involved with, or maybe just repetitive jobs that aren't as fulfilling. Can I take some of those away? But it's not, hey, I'm taking everything away, but I want humans to have a generally better life, to be more healthy. And I think AI is going to have a big place to play that. I think there's going to be a way to equalize a lot of the society, being able to raise folks up that maybe can't make an income. I know it's probably could be a little controversial about how that's all going to play out, but I think technology is going to play a piece there. One of the things that fascinates me most about AI, and I know this is probably much further out than folks are saying. You've got these OpenAI's got these like Dolly models now that you can just type in some text. It's creating paintings and images that are just amazing. Or you've got the GPT-3 models who can write poetry. They can even write code today, things like this, which is amazing. But at the end of the day, as awesome that those sound, they're just massive sort of aggregators, that just taking data off the internet. It's not really intelligence per se. It's just really good at pattern matching and massive scale. So it seems like it's real, but it's just copying things. It's not generally aware. I think it was fairly recently, you may have seen the article, like the Google guy, somebody got fired because they basically said this, thing was sentient, it's alive. And I think it was their Lambda services. And I would just caution that. I just don't think that's there. Like, I think that is definitely going to be here at some point, like the general artificial intelligence. But I think the way we're doing it right now is the wrong approach. If you look at most of machine learning today, it's kind of one-to-one with use case to model. Like got one thing I want to do, I'm training it for that, and that's it. Like, it's harder to apply that model to different cases. And you've got human babies and other, biological examples right in front of our face of intelligence. And babies can see like one object very early on and apply generally to other things at that age, very, very young. And so could basically go circles around AI at this point. And so I think you've seen a lot of folks like Jeff Hawkins, the head of him, again, going back to Meta, but the head LaCoon there, they've taken more of that biological approach. Why don't we try to make models that are more general? You've got different parts of your brain that sort of focus on different areas. What if you made models that could be more general? And you're seeing a lot of advancements in that area, but I still say that's still ways out, and frankly, I may want to get involved with some of that research at some point on the healthcare side to see how some of these neuroscience approaches would work. But so it's fascinating, but obviously you've got to balance that with, hey, these could do some bad things. Everybody's seen the Terminator movies, so we don't want to see any of those types of things. And so I think it's going to be very exciting, but cautiously deploying these things to make sure we don't do more harm than good.
So just, at a basic level, how do you think about applying ethics to some of these concepts, whether it's stuff that you're working on or whether it's, stuff with artificial intelligence that we see on the horizon?
It's critical. It's absolutely, like I said, the regulations are not keeping up. They're doing it in areas where it's just complete failures, like some of these loans and automatic rejections that were happening, but it can happen anywhere. So I feel like any company who's taking this needs to have thought about how they're going to approach ethics with these things. How are we going to, a lot of times this is a coalition between maybe your InfoSec, privacy teams, your legal teams, the data teams, where at least where we're employing it within GHX is we put it part of our governance program. So not just data governance anymore, it's data governance and ML, machine learning and modeling governance. And so this means things like, just from a nuts and bolts perspective, make sure you're monitoring that that model that you trained is still doing what you think it is in production. Because this may not all be nefarious. It could be just accidentally, oops, new data coming in is now all of a sudden discriminating against certain parties, or who knows, biasing and just giving wrong answers, or doing something to just poor value for your customer. So I think it starts with just making sure you got your hands around all the things that are happening. There are some, I would say more of the things that are probably happening that I've seen is just accidental. Like folks are trying to use AI so quick, and it's so easy to use now. Like all the major clouds have it, AWS, Google Cloud, Azure. You can just sign up, use a service. All of a sudden, I've got AI. Well, while that's great, it's also dangerous if you don't have the right understanding about how those things work and how you want to insert them into your applications and how your customers are going to interact with them. And so I think they called it shadow IT back in the day. Now you're starting to see shadow AI, shadow machine learning, where just anybody can get access to it, and usually just accidentally could have poor consequences for your customers. So I think it makes sure, at least for us, we make sure we've got an inventory, all of our AI, whether it's using just maybe language services off of AWS, like translation type stuff. We've got an inventory of all those things, that we've got experts like data science team who is evaluating those over time and making sure they're still delivering what we thought they are. I think it starts with that. And then as you move up, as you're doing more of these complex things, especially if you're dealing with somebody's, where driving cars, or, depending on the use case, or, healthcare, surgery. I mean, that's where, depending on those, you got even more rigor around those things, where it literally could be life or death. You've got to make sure you've got the right testing, the right, you're dang sure that those things are going to work like you think they do, because you're literally dealing with people's lives in some scenarios. So I definitely agree that don't get ahead of yourself. You've got to make sure you with great power becomes great responsibility, and you've got to make sure you've got your hands around all those things, or bad things can happen, even if they're just accidental.
Kind of turning to the idea of kind of hiring, as you think about some of the people that you've been looking at that are younger folks, coming out of college, what are you looking for in younger folks to hire onto your team?
Yeah, well, again, this kind of depends too where you are as an organization. I think where you want to be is I'm lucky enough to be at that spot where I'm not starting from scratch, right? I've got some of my very experienced practitioners on the team. So I'm not going out, because if you're starting from scratch, you may have to hire some of these more advanced or senior folks to start. But since I've already got a set up team, what I'm doing now is I love to work with universities, local schools. Intern programs are some of the best ways, I think, to bring folks in. Not only is it responsible from a company perspective, you're giving these new folks opportunity that, they may not be able to get in other companies yet. Maybe they need to build a little skill set. So that's a good contract to work with them. Let's get some experience, figure out if I like this company, but now I'll have the skills to go to another company if I want. And then on our side, it's good for our company because we don't have to pay the massive experience salary out of the gate, and we're allowed to bring them in, but we're not tricking them or fooling them. We're giving them some value, giving them the ability to learn these skills. And hey, we'd obviously love for them to stay with us, but they'll now have the ability to go somewhere else if we're not, holding up our end of the bargain, or they're not as interested in this domain. But so that's how I ideally like to grow. But what I'm looking for, we kind of touched on this again earlier, is like, these folks better want to learn, better be curious, better want to continue to sort of push the needle, learn new skills. This isn't just, hey, I got the job, now I'm good, and I just hang out. It's got to be creative. And I think we touched on this again too, where very diverse teams, what's so fun about it is you've got those very diverse backgrounds who come to try to talk about a solution or problem you're trying to solve. And it's really cool to be able to, have those perspectives. But if you don't continue to bring that energy and the ability to want to continue to be curious and learn, that's not going to really bring the value that we want here. So I'm looking for that. I like passion. I think, any job you're in these days takes the majority of your time, so you better enjoy that, or enjoy some facet of it, or, you're probably going to flame out or not be happy, be stressed out. And so while some of the things I'm rattling off are hard to test in an interview, but these are the types of things that I would be looking for. And then maybe just obviously lastly, do you love this? I mean, do you want to do this as a career, and is this, everybody kind of says, oh, I want to be in AI, it's flashy and do this or that. But, it's you got to, kind of test for that. Are you really ready to sign up for this? And, I think that's usually the profiles we're looking for.
Two kind of final questions for you, maybe three, but one, what's your favorite data analytics book?
Wow. Wonder if I actually, yeah. So I've been into so many. Obviously, it's hard to pick one. But I will say I've been enamored with the one I'm reading now. I don't know if you guys can see this, but it's kind of fogging out. But it's called the 100-page machine learning book, and like I was saying before, very diverse data science. I mean, most data science books are massive, or like they're getting into these crazy theory where you're like going to sleep before you really understand what they're trying to do. This one's very concise, pragmatic, describes all the different types of machine learning really well. And I've heard multiple folks recommend this to me over time. So I give it a shot. And I was reading this before I was even in my curriculum at UC Berkeley and able to kind of grasp enough of it to be dangerous. But even now that I'm a little bit more dangerous from UC Berkeley, it's making a lot of sense. So I think folks that have recommended this to me say even advanced folks can get something out of this to refer to on a daily basis. Like some of my data science team members have this on their desk. So I give that one a shot.
Great. Jonathan, what's your favorite application in data analytics right now, maybe in your toolkit?
Man, you're kind of coming back to my similar one I answered earlier. I guess it was one that was impactful, but man, the digital twins are my favorite as well too. Maybe it's a little boring, but I guess it was the first time I've been able to employ that in my career. Like I didn't use that in our previous stops, and so I think they have the ability to, especially where I'm at right now in healthcare, really keep those things moving. So that's why I guess I enjoy those, and it brings together multiple disciplines, almost kind of going back to simulations and physics and other types of things. Sometimes it's been pretty interesting, and knowing that I can employ that in almost any domain is pretty cool.
Great. Any final thoughts or parting thoughts for some of the young folks who've been listening in?
Well, I think you've already made a good choice to already be in this class, I think, and pursuing something. Obviously I'm biased, but I think is just an amazing field that's going to have so many. I mean, you're hard pressed. Where are you going to find a vertical that isn't, being disrupted or at least being optimized or bringing competitive advantage with data and analytics? So I think what's cool about that, it's a cross-cutting skill. So you can take this and then go, okay, what else am I really interested in from a domain perspective, and bring this to that party. So I think that's why I enjoy it. Hopefully you folks will find the same enjoyment and find those domains that make you happy deploying some of these techniques.
Jonathan Hodges, thanks for taking 50 minutes to convey all of these experiences you've had over a lifetime, and best of luck with where you're going.
Appreciate it, Nate. And best of luck for everybody in the class.